Good morning. I am Andrea with Happy Cloud Creations. And we are going over the Prismatic Party Quilts Along. And we're going over block 1 today. Block 1. Oh, that's right. I'm going to log on to Instagram really quick. I hope you guys are having a great day. Okay, so now I'm on Facebook and Instagram. We're going over block 1 of the Prismatic Party Quilt Along, which is the second week. Last week we went over cutting our fabrics. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Hello, Linda. Hello, Donna. Yay, I can see comments. Good morning. All you Instagram people, Steve Sews, Be Cool Designs. So if there's any questions, so this is the first block. I didn't finish my block since there's only one block. So this is the first block. This is the large throw. That's why it's so large. This time I'm making the baby size, so my pieces are going to be slightly smaller than that. And I actually colored my coloring sheet in. So what I did was I put all the fabrics that I'm using, I taped them down here so that every time I'm going to a new step, I'm like, what colors am I supposed to be using? And then I can just refer to this and it helps remind me what I'm using. So when you go to the block 1 page, it's going to tell you to go back to the flying geese page to make your flying geese, because this pattern gives you the option to make them 1 at one time or 4 at one time. Sometimes my quilt alongs will be like, okay, week 2 we make all the flying geese, week 3 we make all the half square triangles. But when I did a poll in my Facebook quilt along group, everybody said most people said they wanted to just make all the pieces for that block that week. So, when you get here to block 1, it tells you to do the diamond and square, and then when it gets to this piece, it's going to tell you directions to make flying geese are on page 6 or 7. So then you'll go back to that page and make your flying geese. Since we're only making 1 block this week, you could just go ahead and make all of your flying geese. That's probably what I'm going to do. So that way I am already prepared for the following blocks that, so I'm already prepared for those blocks. What I think next week doesn't have any flying geese. So week 4 and 5 and 6, they all have flying geese. I keep getting video interrupted message. Am I the only one? Well, I don't know, Donna. Mine's not saying anything about my internet, so it may be your internet. Maybe turn it off and then turn it right back on. All right, so I'm going to go a little out of order than the directions just because I think I want to go over the flying geese first. Yeah, I'm going to go over the flying geese first. So I'll go over the 1 at one time first just because they're pretty basic, simple. You need 1 rectangle and 2 squares, and you need to make sure that you're cutting out the correct pieces. If you're not cutting out the correct sizes, then you won't know. So right here, it'll give you a list of the following pieces you need. I'm doing baby, so I need a 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle and 2 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares. So what you do is, what I like to do, I don't use a pen. Where is it? I use a hair marker when lining out my lines. So I'll take a small ruler, just I feel like it's less cumbersome than my 6 by 24, but you can use your 6 by 24. And I line it up with the square from corner to corner, and I draw a line with this hair marker, which it just leaves a little indent. It's easier to see on lighter fabrics, but it can be harder to see the line on dark prints. So then once my line is on them, I stack them on all my rectangles. And then I just stitch a line. It's kind of like chomping into that line on the side of that line, because if you go too far in here into this section, your flying geese isn't going to be the correct size. If you go right on top of that line, if that line is really thin, you might go too far into this section. So I like to just line my needle up right along the edge of that line and chomp toward the outside of that line. I am using a 50 weight thread. So I know depending on what size thread you use, when you use use different size threads, it's going to give you different measurements. So when I open this up, it's going to take up a little bit of that seam. It's going to take up, and the bulk of the thread is going to take up a little bit of amount. So I like to finger press it open and then press it with my iron. You can line it up without trimming it off first, just to make sure it does go all the way to that corner. Or you can just trim it off and then press it. Sometimes I do it this way, but then sometimes I just go, I don't want to have to worry about cutting it later. So I just take my scissors and I eyeball about 1/4 of an inch from that seam, finger press it open, and then press it with my iron. No motion, just pressing. I don't use steam either, because sometimes steam can make it a little looser or wonkier. So just press. So once you have that one pressed, you're gonna do that exact same thing with your second square over here. Mark your line with whatever tool you want to use. You can use a pen that's designed for fabric that disappears. Make sure you're not getting like a fabric pen that is meant to draw on fabric, because that would be horrible, because then it wouldn't wash out. You want to make sure it's something that says water soluble or disappears, air disappears, something like that. I used to use those all the time, but it felt like they would dry out so fast. So once I saw somebody, I think it's either Susie Quilts or Emily Dennis from Quilty Love used this, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's so awesome, I have to try it. And when I got it, it was only like $4.50 on Amazon. I think they're a little more expensive now, but it's worth it. Some people say they use the dull edge of a butter knife, and that way you're just getting an indent in your fabric and you don't have to worry about something not washing out. All right, so I did the same thing on this side, and again, you're going to chomp in to this side of the line, especially if you have a really thick marker or something. You are going to chop into this side of the line. And since these are the one at one time, I already have one ironed out. I left this one when I ironed it, so you can see it went all the way to the edge of that fabric. And if you were ironing it while you still had those, you could chop it off. If it wasn't lined up correctly, and like you could see the backing, like you could see this going above or below that backing, you can trim it up. With these, if your seam is pretty accurate, you shouldn't have to do any trimming on these. But I do like to go around and just make sure that they are the 2.5 by 4.5 inches. Because sometimes, like, maybe I didn't cut my this strip, my 2.5 by 4.5 perfect. Maybe it was slightly larger. I just like to go through and make sure each unit is trimmed to the correct size. Roberta, as excited as I was to get started on this, I have to postpone. Oh no, I'm sorry. Broken pipes, that's horrible. Hopefully they can get fixed soon. So this one, if you don't want a lot of trimming after it's done, this is probably good. And a tip I have for keeping your seam straight, go slow. It's not a race, so don't go super fast. Going slow and making sure you're lining it up correctly with your needle, you'll get a straighter line with this one. Does anybody have any questions about the 1 at one time? If you're going scrappy, this is going to be the option that you want to do if you don't have larger squares, because the 4 at one time requires a larger square. If there's no questions, I will move on to the 4 at one time. All right. So I don't want this to be like an hour long for you guys, and then you guys won't want to watch it. So 4 at one time is on page 6 of the pattern. And above it, it tells you, okay, the ones needed for block 1 are here, block 3, block 4, block 5, block 6. So really this week, all you need to make is 2 different combos, which is the CB and the EC. So this is my EC combo. And with this one, sometimes I'll put the squares on and line up my ruler and draw the line from the top to the bottom. Or, again, I will just take my squares and I will draw the lines down diagonally on a stack of them. That way I can just start placing them and pinning them. I like to pin them in place, 3 spots when they're small. If they're a larger, because like the king size, you're going to be using a 10.5-inch square and 5.5-inch squares. So you might want to put additional pins in there just to make sure it doesn't wiggle around. So what I like to do is draw my line down the center, which you cannot see, sorry. Can you see that, Instagram? Can you see that, Facebook? And then I line my foot up. I took it off my machine. Here it is. So I line my foot up down that center, and it sews me a scant 1/4 inch seam. So scant is basically just slightly smaller than a 1/4 inch. It is basically taking into account the fabric and the thread width when you fold open your piece. Most quilt patterns suggest this just because if your seams allowances are too big, your pieces won't end up the correct size. Have you tried a crated grid fold corner clipper to make the flying geese? No, I haven't, Carrie. I just use a basic ruler. I don't really have any fancy ones. Just, this is a basic 6.5 by 6.5. But if somebody is having trouble with their flying geese, that is a great idea to try using one of those special flying geese rulers. Okay, so what this is a 1/4 inch foot for my Janome. A lot of sewing machines will make a special 1/4 inch foot. My mom, she didn't have one for her machine, and so we went to Joann Fabrics, and there's actually a Singer one there that doesn't look like this, but the width of this is the same. So you'll get, if you line this up with the edge of your fabric, you'll get that 1/4 inch. And also if you line this up on the line, you'll get that 1/4 inch. If you're having trouble with that still, if you notice at the bottom of the pattern, it talks about drawing 2 lines that are 1/4 inch from the center. Like you would want to draw a line down the center, and then you would draw a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch, and then instead of drawing on that line, you might want to draw so a little inward of that line, depending how thick your line is again. So once we got both our lines on both sides, we'll take out our pins. And some people like to use a rudder cutter and a ruler for this. But I've always had slippery rulers, and I didn't want to worry about slipping and then ruining my flying geese. So I just use scissors to cut these apart. And then so you will have 2 little heart-shaped units. What I like to do is finger press it open and then press it with my iron. And when I'm doing that, you're going to want to try to make sure this line is as straight as possible when you're pressing it. If it's bowed at all, that's going to make your flying geese wonky. So just remember, trying to make this line right here as straight as possible when you're pressing. So another thing about making these slightly larger and then trimming to size, if you are having a problem with that 1/4 inch, this makes it not as big of a deal. As long as your seam allowance isn't really, really huge, you know. So when you're doing this one, oh, that's right, I saved a darker one so you could see it better. You're going to draw that line down the center of your square and place it in the corners of that little heart. And then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch from both sides. And if you notice, the ends of those are coming right up where they meet with this little tiny triangle, like the 2 valleys of the 3 mountains. That line will be going perfectly in that spot. So that'll give you a good judge of, okay, I'm sewing in the correct spot. And same with this. Just take your needles out. Cut it down the center. Boom. Then finger press it open. And then press with your iron. Don't do a lot of motion, just press. I notice a lot of times just pressing in quilting will give you less wonky blocks, less wonky seams, because you're just pressing, not doing a lot of movement. So once you have those pressed, it's time to trim these. And these are made slightly larger. So you got to figure out, okay, how am I going to trim this? Down at the bottom of the pattern, it tells you, so make sure to look at pictures but also read. It tells you that you're going to want to line this point right here up with the center point of the flying geese. So like mine, since my total flying geese is 2.5 by 4.5, you're going to divide 4.5, and that would be 2 1/4. Which I give you all those amounts here. Halfway point is 2 1/4. Halfway point is 2 3/4. So on and so on. And where's my ruler? Right there. So I look at my ruler and I got 2. Yeah, 2, and then 1 line in is going to be a 1/4. Well, actually 2, because that's an 1/8, and then that's a 1/4. And I was going to try to do that down here, but I don't think you guys will be able to see. 2 1/4. So, mine has a little dot, if you can see. And I line that little dot up basically in that triangle, and it's just going to give you a little excess. And then also when you're lining that point up, you're going to want to make sure that point lands on this 1/4 inch mark on your ruler, that first 1/4 inch, because you're going to want to leave a 1/4 inch above that point when you're trimming. Because if you don't leave a 1/4 inch above this point, when you go to sew all your flying geese together, you're going to cut that little tip of your flying geese off, and you don't want to do that. I feel like I have a trimmed one somewhere. Just so you guys can see how much is getting trimmed off. Not much at all. Maybe I'll do the dark one. Here. You see, not much at all is getting trimmed off of this flying geese when you line it up. Maybe an 1/8 on the sides and on the bottom, but not much at all. And that just helps you if your seams aren't perfectly straight, which we're not perfect. So, I find that, you know, sometimes they don't turn out perfect. When I started making the 4-at-1-time flying geese, they did not turn out perfect. The more I made them and the slower I went, making sure to press them correctly, they turned out a lot better. Be Cool Designs. I did find my flying geese came out better with a scant 1/4. Yes, just that little tiny bit, you know, gives you that extra room to make sure they're the correct size. So does anybody have questions with the 4-at-1-time flying geese? I know there was someone in the group that had said that her flying geese turned out to be 3 by 6 inches, even though they were supposed to be 3.5 by 6.5. I think your problem might be too big of a seam allowance. So most people's presser foot that comes with your machine is going to be a lot bigger than a 1/4 inch. And so that could be your problem if they're ending up a whole 1/2 inch too small. Or I would double check to make sure you cut out the correct size pieces for those flying geese. So no questions with the 4 at 1 time. I really enjoy the 4 at 1 time. And I think once you get the hang of them, you'll love them too. All right. So next step, we'll get back to the pattern. So in the pattern, the first step is basically making that diamond in square, which is very similar to other constructions of like the 1 at 1 time flying geese. So instead, you're going to be having a square with 2 squares. So I'm making the baby size, so this is going to be 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches. The small ones are 2.5 inches. So basically I like to go through all my squares and make a diagonal line with my hair marker again. And then I pin them in place on opposite sides. And then again, I will just stitch into the side of that line that I drew, chopping into that side. And again, you can just leave the fabric all there before cutting and press it open to make sure those points do match. Also, sometimes that helps you when you're pressing to line up those points and then press. That way you can make sure you're pressing it even and straight. And then it will look kind of like this, like a petal, kind of. Once those are pressed down, you're going to do the same thing with the 2 opposite corners. Draw your line, stitch right along that edge of that line. April says, I'm making the king size, so I probably just do a single flying geese method, but when doing smaller ones, I like to do the 4 at 1 time. Yeah, because those large 10.5 inch squares, those would be kind of pretty cumbersome, huh? To make large ones. All right. So we got both of these sewn up. Oh, my husband's calling me. Sorry, husband. I'm almost done. So now we have our block totally pressed. I like to, since some of these blocks, like mentioned, she's making the king, they're going to end up being very large. Like the king one, where is my pattern? The king one is a 9.5 by 9.5. So you're going to want to make sure to take your ruler and make sure it's the correct size. Because even if, like, you do the best you can at sewing your lines, maybe they're a little bit off, and this one juts up a tiny bit, you're going to make sure those are completely straight and the correct size. So anybody have questions with the diamond in the diamond, or the diamond in the square? That's pretty simple. And then the next component of this block is the 4 corners. And I like to just make them all the same size, same way, and then just kind of rotate them around the block. So you're just sewing 2 squares together, and then once you press this, I press it to the darker. In the pattern it says to press to the color E, but if this is darker, you may want to press to your color C. And then you take your next piece. If this piece is bigger than this piece, then you know your seam is too small. If this piece is too small compared to this, you know your seam is too big. So if your seam is perfect, the 4th inch, then they're going to line up perfectly. And then you'll sew those together, right sides together, and then you're going to press it open, and then you got this cute little corner piece for all your 4 sides. Any questions, other questions about this block? Then once you got them together, or once you have all those pieces, you're going to, in step 5, you're going to sew 2 flying geese together. And I like to press away from that point just because it creates less bulk when you're pressing away from the point, so pressing down. And then once you have all your components, it's basically like 9 blocks that you're sewing together. Sew them together in rows. Then press the seams in alternate directions. That way you can nest those seams and they'll lay a lot nicer. And then we're done. Just 1 block. So I think with the rest of the time this week, I'm going to finish the rest of my flying geese just so that I'm prepared for week 4. And I will probably try to get the pieces for next week's video done earlier instead of waiting until Tuesday morning like I did today to finish them up. So if there's any questions that I didn't go over in this video, you can leave a comment on the video. You can always post in the group, say, hey, I have a question, and then like tag at Andrea Smith or at Happy Cloud Creations, or you can email me at happycloudcreations@gmail.com, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. But I'm really excited to see your blocks. So once they're all done, post a picture on Instagram with the hashtag Prismatic Party QAL, or post it in the group, and we all would love to see your finished blocks. If that's it, I'm gonna get going. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.